if we set the force of language upon the unknown, that we could, with miracles, we could bring the crops out of the ground. The Anglo-Saxons had what they called spells. They believed that by uttering a recitation, a formula, verbal formula over the field in which they had planted seeds, that would ensure the harvest, that would bring the seeds to fruition. We don't believe in language to that extent now. Where you are likely to find it, if at all, is in poetry. And the oral tradition is very important. And I'm always telling my students that the closest thing we have to the real oral tradition in our world is theater. You know, plays. Shakespeare was an oral poet. He wrote for the voice. And if you see a production of Hamlet on the stage, for example, you are seeing oral tradition. You are seeing people communicating with each other at the level of the human voice, and you're seeing their body language and their eye contact and their inflections and so on, all of which are missing from writing. So the oral tradition is vital and very, very important. And there's a lot we don't know about it, but it is a fascinating subject. This poem is called Grasses. Again, same kind of landscape. I did not want to see the nights consume the grasses. The fields were golden to green that summer, and the leaves shone like rippling water. The air was still and hot. Like the birds, I kept the pace of the season singing. But the nights came one after another, growing longer and cold. The sun withdrew, and the shadows of dead limbs crazed the snow. After a long time standing in the winter wind, my spirit too withdrew, though I remained. Numb and dismembered in my mind among the pale and brittle grasses. Kind of an impressionistic poem, spontaneous and simply a picture of seasons, seasonal changes. That's a good kind of subject for poetry, obviously. Sometimes I write poems that are funny, and there is certainly room for that in poetry. Poetry is very, very big and comprehensive, and it is the best language of which one is capable. Ideally, there is nothing wasted in a poem. There is no syllable that is not absolutely imperative to the life of the poem. So to write poetry is really to enter a kind of discipline that demands a great deal of the writer and represents the crown of literature. I was about to comment on the humor of poems. When I left Stanford, I taught there, by the way. I was a student there, and then I was on the faculty for a number of years. And when I left Stanford to go to the University of Arizona, all the time I was in California, I was in exile. I felt that I was out of my element, but the Southwest was my native heath. So all the time, 20 years I spent in California and meant to return to the Southwest. Finally, in 1980, I had the chance to return, not to New Mexico, which is where I spent much of my boyhood, but to Arizona. The University of Arizona had Tucson. And so, I took advantage of that return, that opportunity to return. And I had never lived in the desert before. Tucson is on the edge of the Sonora Desert, as you know. It's very hot there in the summer. And Stanford is rather mild, as you know, in climate. And, so there was a tremendous adaptation. And when I went to Tucson, I wasn't sure how I was to get along in the heat of summer there. And I soon learned that people in Tucson survive because of two things. They have swimming pools, and they have two kinds of air conditioning. And so I bought a house with a swimming pool and two kinds of air conditioning. And I would jump in the pool in the heat of the day, and I would swim laps. And it was good exercise, but it was terribly boring. I don't know if any of you know about the boredom of swimming laps, but it's worse than jogging. Because jogging, at least you get to see the scenery, the countryside, but if you're swimming laps, you're looking down at a black line, back and forth, back and forth, back. It's terrible. But you keep cool that way. And I wanted to find some way to defeat the boredom of swimming laps. And I hit upon the idea of writing epitaphs as I swam. Not writing literally, but composing epitaphs, okay? And this became a real habit with me, and I found out that composing epitaphs is a little bit like eating peanuts. You can't stop. So I have a number of these things, and some of them are 2-lap epitaphs, 4-lap epitaphs, and so on. I'm just going to interject one of them to show you what it's like. While I was at the University of Arizona early on, I was invited to give the keynote address to a group of ceramicists up at Tempe, the Arizona State University. And this was a huge convention of ceramicists. They came from all over the world. And so I was pleased to accept it. I spoke to them. But I had no idea that there were so many ceramicists and that they were so well organized. They all wore little pottery name tags, which I thought was a little kitschy, but you know. And when I got back to Tucson, I jumped in the pool and I composed an epitaph. And here, this is how it goes. Here lies the potter Momaday, who has himself become his clay. And lest his memory be forgot, recycle him into a pot. Here's a very recent poem. I have a good number of poems that have been published, most of them in a book called In the Presence of the Sun. And I have, since the publication of that book, written a fair number of poems that have not been published. And I keep adding to that number. I write poetry consistently, if somewhat slowly, but poetry should be written slowly and consistently. This one is called The Sun Horses, and goes like this. The horses came, and we did not understand at first that a destiny came with them. They ranged along the ridge, dancing their shadows on the sun. Some came to us when we sang, but others kept away on the horizon, and we knew in our deepest reverence that we were who we ought to be, as long as there were horses appearing on the skyline. Then one day, after we had gotten their way, the soldiers fired 1,000 shots, and the sun blanched, and the horses were no longer there. That's a rather strong poem. What I was thinking of course, was the Indian Wars, and the Kiowas, for example, were attacked in Palo Duro Canyon, Texas, and they were marched from there to Fort Sill and imprisoned in the old stone corral. And their horses, and the horses were so important to the Kiowas. The Kiowas are said to have owned more horses per capita than any other tribe. The horse is a sacred animal like the buffalo. And the horses were shot right outside the compound in the hearing of the imprisoned Kiowas. And so, you know, that to me is a terrible thing, and I think about it and sometimes write about it.